On behalf of Archiloop India team, I welcome you all. I Pranay Kumar, the founder of Archiloop India Initiative, and on the board with us we have Shashank Shekhar and Aditi Gaur, the co-founders of this organization. We welcome you all at this special series of webinar where you may experience a new school of thought for rephrasing a time-honored system in form of planning and architecture by various young intellectuals progressing and pioneering in various fields across the globe. Archiloop India Initiative is a non-profit, non-government organization powered by a team of young professionals and intellects, collectively aiming towards the awareness of art and design, architectural planning, and also culture and heritage of the Indian subcontinent. So today we are on the second episode of our webinar series. Or say we are putting up another milestone in our journey to contribute towards the education and raising up awareness in understanding the formation of urban social and cultural and historic fabric of the society. So I hope you will enjoy this meeting, and yeah, I would wish you all to stay in the loop with us, and please support us on Instagram. Now, Aditi, you can continue.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Hello to all the participants. I would like to introduce the session to you first. As we all know that we are a part of a progressive and evolving world, a world that is working towards the development of environments that can be accessed, understood, and used to the greatest extent possible. But the question is, how can we make environments that are inclusive, that meets everyone's needs, whether old or young, tall or short, active or with impaired? Question lies, is it about the design of products and services, or is it about the systems of communication and information technology that are designed to cater the needs of disabled people? The answer to this is basically ensuring the mainstream products, services, and environments that cater for the diversity of the human condition without the need for further specialist adaptation. This can be done by creating universally accessible environments, products, and systems with attention focused on the changing demographics, differences in functional ability, and preferences as a part of everyday life experience globally. Yet we are faced with various barriers in this process. To knowing more about these barriers, we have with us architect Najib Gaurav as our guest expert for this webinar on excluding the already excluded architecture as a barrier. Architect Navjeet is a rehabilitation science doctoral student at Queen's University, Canada. As a community developer, he has extensive experience in community work. He also co-authored the book Beginner's Guide on Access Audit for Higher Education Institutions, a photo-narrative approach. He is one of the 10 recipients of the prestigious Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Scholarship 2019 globally, and his research aims to engage the rural Indian community through innovative participation measures to improve the quality of life and social integration for people with disabilities. I extend a very warm welcome to you, sir, and we would request you to please take us through your presentation. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Aditi. Thank you so much for this overwhelming introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Navjeet, and today I will be talking about how architecture is acting as a barrier and how, through participation in practices of architecture, we are excluding the already excluded. Before I jump into the topic, I would like to take you back to my architectural days. To my architectures. Hello?
Yes, yes,
Hello? Am I audible?
yes, you are audible.
Okay. So back in my architectural days in 2008 and 2009, we had a national conference at our school related to universal design and disability. And there I met with a journalist from a renowned newspaper, and he said that architecture is a novel discipline. If you just draw a line on paper, it means you are creating a roof over someone's head. I had no idea back then how to respond to this. Should I celebrate it because I am being in a novel discipline? Or was he trying to make a statement through that? that it is something that is very responsible discipline, and we need to create something that includes all. On that note, let's look at the journey of architecture. So it has been a fascinating journey of living in the caves, which was in jungle, to moving to a more organized chaos of a concrete jungle, where everything is organized, but there is a lot of chaos in that. Having said that, let's talk about the agenda of today's meeting or the webinar. At the end of this session, the participants are expected to have a good understanding about how we overlook the end user in the process of design and planning. We'll have a clear understanding of why it is important to involve them. We'll recognize effective strategies to deal with it, develop an understanding to remove those barriers from our society. While I was working as a community developer in Delhi, I met this boy called Sumit. Sumit was very good at academics and so in sports. One day while playing cricket, he met with an accident, and due to this, he has to use the wheelchair for the entire life. And due to this use of wheelchair and staying inside the home, his friends and peers started social distancing from them. And gradually, his parents, his siblings, they also started distancing from him, and he seemed to be a burden on their family. And due to this social distancing, he has to be through a great amount of physical as well as mental quarantine or isolation. And gradually, it leads to a social death where he had no social capital, no one to talk to, no one to speak up to. Even a small accident like that can change the entire life of Sumit. This is a small story from the community. Having said that, let's look at what's the story so far. So during past 50 years, population growth and resources utilization has been increasing exponentially in our urban context. If you look at the urban infrastructure, cities has been growing at an alarming rate. And due to this growth of the cities, people from the rural areas are migrating in great numbers to the city for the opportunities for employment and well-being. And this puts a lots of pressure in the influx of population in the urban areas. If we look at the growth of the population, so by 2030, it's expected to be 4.9 billion population in the urban areas. If we look at the overall population growth, 60% of the global population of population growth will be there in the urban areas, which means that 60% of the people living in the world would be living in the urban areas. And comparing that with the developed and the less developed countries, sorry, hello? Yeah. So in the developed country, 81% of the population would be living in the urban areas, while in less developed or developing countries, it would be 56, which means there would be huge influx of population in the urban areas that will put a tremendous pressure on the infrastructure and the facilities that would be there for people. Studies suggest that most of these people who are migrating to these urban areas are mostly live in slums or would be living in the slums. Global Urban Observation Report suggests that presently 40% of these populations who are migrating are living in the slums. However, in less developed countries, the percentage rises by 78.2%. Rapid urban growth and this influx of population create huge imbalance between the kind of facilities we have in the urban areas to deal with this influx of population. So let's look at how these structures actually are. If you look at this image, it is a typical bird eye view of a slum. You can see some of the buildings popping out of the whole horizontal canvas, and there are some high-rise building as well. It looks really fascinating from the top, but let's go down and see the actual realities. This can be a playground for people living in the slums. Children would be playing, they would be drying up their clothes, and the same space is also used for people to commute using the locals. This can be a space where people will be taking rest. It can be a home for someone from where a girl gets ready and goes to a school. Then this space can be a space where most of their activities of daily life are taking place. For example, washing utensils, commuting to the urban areas, because most of the areas inside these spaces has been compact. So they are left with only this open spaces to use or utilize. So these are the social spaces that they have within these communities. Even on the streets, most of their cooking and other play or other activities are taking place. And the same streets with the change of season seems like this, where most of their houses are filled with water, they are left with nothing and they cannot do anything. However, they have this beautiful smile on the face. And it's the duty of us as an architect or planner to ensure that we can keep this smile in such a way that it gives them opportunities for good health, support, for participation within the community, and enjoy the life. We are curbing their childhood by providing such facilities. Having said that, the urban infrastructure of the slums is growing horizontally. That's what seems from the top. However, if you look at more developed countries, it's also growing vertically. This is creating a huge pressure to the kind of lifestyle people would be having. Having said that, let's look at how the opportunities of participation are divided in our society. It is structured, if you look at this pyramid, it is structured on the basis of differences in the age, ability, gender, class, caste, religion, poverty, the division between urban and rural background, the language, and most of the facilities that we create or design are basically for the people who are there at the level first and second. And a good amount of population who needs to be included are completely excluded, that are from level 4 to 8. So let's see how and why we exclude this population. This image that you are seeing on the screen shows how within the society, although we promote that it is a society for all, we are giving opportunities or creating policies that is encouraging full participation. However, we are creating barriers for people with disabilities and other socially marginalized groups. There are physical barriers like the steps that you see here. Then there are attitudinal barriers that exist within the society where people are not allowed to enter to certain spaces because of their disability, social background. And due to these two barriers, there is a huge amount of psychological barrier that is there on the person with disability. They develop lower self-esteem, lower confidence. They take it as their fate. They stay inside their home. They have no one to talk to. And this social interaction is really intense and awkward and problematic. And it leads to a sense of removal from the society, and they distance themselves from the society due to that. While interacting with one of the person with disability in the community, he mentioned that my disability is not my inability to perform, but it is how people respond to my disability, how they perceive me, how they ascribe a stereotypical identity with me. The disability does involve certain sort of limitations to certain situations, but the sources of limitation is majorly due to the barriers imposed by the society and not on the personal limitation of an individual. Having said that, let's discuss how person and environment interact with each other and how we are creating the divide and how we are excluding the already excluded. So if you see the arrow, that is the vertical axis, that's the function that society decides as the low and the high function. This is person's ability that we discussed in our previous slides related to physical, psychological, and social. That is the demand of the environment. Environment is physical, psychological, and social. So if there is a gap between the kind of ability person has and the demand that environment creates, then we are creating a disabling condition for people with disability. It's very much related to the model of person and environment fit, where fit refers to the kind of congruence that we can create between person's ability and demand of the environment. If the fit is poor, the person can have a very stressful life, and it can be devastating for them. And to mitigate this gap, we need to ensure that the people with disability are having a good amount of authority on the kind of environment that they want for them, which means that they have the control or say in the design. If we are able to do that, we would be able to reduce this gap and would be able to create a facilitating environment for them. Environment which is very inclusive, positive, safe, secure, supportive for the opportunities of participation, and it also has elements which leads to physical, psychological, and social growth of the individual. And because of this kind of environment or the gap that we are creating, hello, a mother has to carry her daughter like this on a daily basis just to ensure that she is having a good access to education. Or a person has to make such huge amount of effort just to reach an ATM or a shop. Or another person is unable to access the washroom. These are the images of the Sulabh Shauchalaya or the public toilets of India, where we are creating ramp in such a way that it's completely inaccessible. And due to this inaccessibility, people are using the handrails to dry their clothes. And this is another ramp that has been created in a urban space, which is frequently used by the people. Look at the kind of slopes that they have created. Or even in the transport, although we have adapted to low floor buses where the accessibility could be very easy, but the kind of ramp that is there to access these transport facilities are really challenging. Look at the amount of effort that these both guys are doing just to pull the wheelchair inside. And when we are not having such type of facilities, people are unable to use these spaces. Some facilities usable for by the disabled, then we are creating this kind of steps, which is again creating a barrier in accessibility. Although we are providing the facility or creating such environment, but these kind of small issues can create to huge impact participation the people with disability. For that matter, the emergency exit, you can see how smartly a person has put a pillar on the way of exit. And these barriers, they are, but again people will say that no, we have moved so far in the Department of Architecture and Planning, we have moved so ahead in this discipline and we are modifying the environment based on the kind of user need. I will say yes, we are working towards changing the dreams into reality. We are making ramps in public spaces which are completely like this, which has handrails at both two levels. It is accessible for different people with different height, different type of capabilities. However, again, look at this person who is pushing the wheelchair. Aren't ramps supposed to be independently accessible? They are. There's no need for a person to just push the wheelchair. It should be ideally used by the person who is using the wheelchair by themselves. This is another example where people are using the wheelchairs are taken to the lift to access the upper level metro facilities for transportation. Although we are making these facilities accessible, but at the very basic level, these spaces are inaccessible for the people. For that matter, the government building, we are making entrance for people with disability with a ramp. There may be a ramp on the other side as well. They have given a very good width as well. But again, they have put a board here which is very disturbing for me. It says Viklanjan Hetu, which means only for disabled. That means, hello? Which means that if person is using this ramp to access the building, he or she is a disabled. Ideally, we are not needed to put these signs. A research done on access to the built environment using ramp and steps suggests that 60% of the people who would be using these spaces access the building using ramp. And these kind of signboards again create a divide or exclude the people. These are the signboards that are creating stigma or the kind of perception we develop in the society towards person with disability. We are making ramps like this, which is accessible, which has handrail at 2 levels, but again, we need to put a sign here. We don't need to park a vehicle in front of the ramp. But that's our usual practice. We park vehicle wherever we see spaces. Just imagine if a person using a wheelchair wants to access this building, he has to or she has to stay there until and unless someone moves that vehicle from there. Let's look at how these things are seen in developing and developed context. Considering the developing context where we are making some facilities that are accessible, however, the main access points, we are creating some labels that are again excluding the people to use these spaces. Within developed context, we have something that is completely accessible. However, if you look at the doorknob, it might be accessible to a good amount of people. Other people having certain limitations in terms of grip, elderly people, they won't be able to use it. Ideally, it should be like this that exists in the Indian context. They have made a very good water fountain which can be accessed by people with all types of abilities, age, gender, heights. Again, these spaces are not utilized for what they have been made, which means there is something that is missing, and that is usability of the space. Usability is defined as by World Health Organization as the effective, efficient, and comfortable use of space and design. By effective, it means that doing the right thing, how useful something is, whatever we are designing. By effective, it means that doing things right, how well we have done something, and people, whether people are comfortable in using these spaces or not. Let's look at how usability can enhance the use of spaces, our neighborhood, town, cities, transportation, and building. So let's suppose there is a space that is unable to use, make it accessible. Once you make it accessible, we are expanding the range of user or the diversity of user who would be using it. But again, there is a big question of whether it's usable or not. Once you make it usable, that is easier to use different age groups or population, we increase the good amount of the good range of people who would be using it. That includes people with disabilities, people with certain needs, health, nationalities, elderly people, disabled, pregnant women, and others. So usability is something that is what we are missing from our practice. We are making this space accessible, but it is not usable to its maximum limit or even to its optimum limit. Having said that, it takes us to the design of something that is universally acceptable, that is universal design. World Health Organization in 2011 defined universal design as a process that increases usability, safety, health, and social participation through design and operation of environments, product, and system in response to the diversity of people and abilities. If you look at the definition, it says it's a process. It increases the usability, safety, health, and through design operation of the environment, we are able to encourage the social participation which was actually missing. So there is some sort of knowledge that is missing that we need to pull to ensure that we are encouraging the social participation of people. Once people are able to participate within the society, this will increase the kind of acceptance for them that is there in the society. They are able to enjoy the life, they are able to go to the cultural celebrations, they are able to go to the different society activities. They will have some say in the development of the society, and they will be considered as a productive member of the society. And having discussed about the knowledge, let's look at what is knowledge and how it looks like. There are basically two forms of knowledge. One is, hello? Yeah. So there are basically two forms of knowledge. One is explicit and another one is tacit. Explicit is the knowledge that is derived out of scientific experiment, research that we do, that follows some logic that can be codified, written down, and communicated to others. So these are the knowledge that is there in the books, in the journals. However, there is other form of knowledge, that is tacit knowledge, that is developed from direct experience and action. The kind of experience people are having in the society. It is highly pragmatic and it is specific to certain context, situations. It is difficult to articulate or codify. However, it holds the most valuable insights that's there, because it is the lived experiences of the people, so they know how they want their environment to be, that can be inclusive and supportive of that. Let's understand this through this image. Knowledge, if we consider it as an iceberg, the explicit knowledge is the tip of the iceberg, the knowledge that is there in the books. However, tacit knowledge is something that is developed through the interaction, by talking to the people, by encouraging them to participate in the dialogue and dialogue with us in the lives of the people. This is a huge amount of knowledge that is missing from the practice of architecture and planning. So it suggests that we need to have a participatory approach where we can have people who are the caregivers of a person with disability. It can be occupational therapist, physiotherapist, or people who are there with them, the parents, friends, family, siblings. We need to take their insight, creating this environment for people with disability. We need to consider the input from architects and planners, and most importantly, we need to cater the need of the end user, the people with disability. Once we are able to cater to all these stuff, we would be able to make a space that is usable by the people. This dictates us to go to a participatory interdisciplinary approach towards creating an enabling environment with the involvement of end user in the planning and design process, because they are having the lived experiences. They would be having a good amount of knowledge how they want their environment to be, and that is what is missing, and we need to imbibe that, we need to include that. And also, interdisciplinary approach is needed because many a time, having being a